Have you ever wondered what really happens behind palace doors when public smiles disappear and private decisions reshape lives? What truths remain hidden when power, family, and legacy collide, and children become the silent center of it all? Because in early February 2026, something extraordinary unfolded inside the British monarchy. Something quiet, controlled, and so unprecedented that even seasoned royal watchers struggled to make sense of it. A decision was made that reshaped Prince Harry's future, altered Meghan Markle's public role, and placed two young children at the center of the most secretive royal intervention in modern history. Why did Harry agree to a custody outcome few believed he ever would? What forced the palace to act with such speed and silence? And why did Meghan's absence from proceedings speak louder than any statement she could have released? To understand what truly happened, we have to look beyond headlines and into the rooms where power rarely announces itself. A morning that changed everything. London didn't wake to rumors or tabloid leaks. It woke to a formal palace release. Concise, sterile, and impossible to ignore. 7-year-old Archie and 5-year-old Lilibet had been formally removed from Meghan Markle's custodial authority. Not partially. Not temporarily. Formally. No cameras outside courtrooms. No emotional soundbites. No family confrontations broadcast to the world. Instead, sealed documents arrived at Windsor Castle before sunrise, signed, executed, and complete. Why move so fast? Why move so quietly? And why now? Royal insiders later said what shocked them most wasn't the ruling itself, it was the silence surrounding it. Silence, inside royal governance, doesn't mean calm. It means containment. So what triggered containment? To understand that, we need to rewind, not to London, but to California. The first warning sign. In late January, administrators at a private school in Santa Barbara flagged something unusual. Archie and Lilibet were suddenly withdrawn. No explanation, no transfer paperwork, no communication with international child welfare liaisons tied to their cross-border custody status. Just absence. The internal note was short but alarming. No show. Immediate concern. No medical documentation. No relocation notice. No future education plan. Inside royal systems, when children disappear from institutional records, it isn't seen as privacy. It's seen as risk. Within hours, the report crossed the Atlantic and reached Windsor's Internal Crisis Unit, a department rarely activated and almost never for minors. That's when concern became escalation. And escalation became something far more serious. The red folder at Windsor. 2 days later, Princess Anne arrived at Windsor Castle carrying a red folder stamped, "Immediate custodial breach." Inside were documents that transformed worry into urgency. Cancelled pediatric appointments with no rescheduling. Legal instructions blocking communication between Meghan's attorneys and royal child welfare officials. Financial filings showing the dissolution of a multi-million-pound trust meant for Archie and Lilibet's UK education. This was no longer about parental disagreement. It was about stability, emotional, educational, and legal. One palace official later said, "This stopped being personal. It became protective." But what was still missing? Intent. And intent arrived in the form of a sealed memo. The memo that changed everything. Dated January 29th, the intelligence brief reportedly outlined something far more alarming than custody conflict. According to internal summaries, Meghan had been preparing not for negotiation, but disengagement. Not mediation. Not compromise. Withdrawal. The memo suggested she had signed a non-disclosure agreement with a Middle Eastern media financier requiring the removal of all prior family affiliations before launching a new global brand identity. Royal legal teams reportedly uncovered. Refusal to participate in Harry's joint custody framework. Instructions to remove the children's names from future publishing and streaming projects. Plans to eliminate public association between the children and the royal institution entirely. One senior source described it with a phrase that echoed through palace halls. Not co-parenting, identity erasure. And that single phrase reframed everything. When identity becomes unstable, and children become disconnected from lineage, institutions respond not emotionally, but constitutionally. So who stepped in? Prince William steps in. On February 2nd, Prince William abruptly left an economic summit in Manchester and returned to Windsor. He was handed the same red folder. After reading the final pages, insiders say he paused, closed the file, and said quietly, "This is no longer about Meghan. It's about the survival of 2 children, emotionally, legally, and historically." Within hours, Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh was authorized to activate emergency custodial safeguards. For the first time in decades, the Crown prepared to invoke a dormant guardianship framework, one designed not for scandal, but for instability involving royal minors. But how far could royal authority extend? And what happens when tradition collides with modern law? The Crown's 3-step lockdown. When the palace moves, it doesn't move publicly. It moves through sealed documents, constitutional protocols, and centuries-old legal structures. This time, 3 actions were triggered almost simultaneously. First, passport suspension. Archie and Lilibet's international travel rights were frozen. No border crossing without authorization from both the Princess Royal and the Crown's Child Welfare Council. Second, identity protection. Under the Windsor Privacy Act of 2023, commercial use of the children's names, likenesses, and royal branding was blocked for 5 years, covering documentaries, publishing, sponsorships, and digital platforms. Third, the Royal Restoration Fund. Prince William approved a £12 million trust dedicated to emotional recovery, education, and long-term reintegration, shielded from all commercial interests. This wasn't reputation management. It was institutional containment. But what escalated everything wasn't media coverage. It was Meghan's unexplained withdrawal of the children from school. And in royal governance, silence where documentation should exist signals instability. So the palace moved again. The guardianship protocol activates. Within hours of the school report, the Royal Guardianship Protocol was activated, a rarely used safeguard allowing the Crown to assert custodial oversight when royal minors face threats to welfare, identity, or exploitation. An emergency meeting convened at Sandringham. Princess and chaired. Prince William attended. Lord Alastair Pembroke of the Privy Council joined virtually. Their objectives were clear. Establish jurisdiction. Protect emotional continuity. Prevent royal children from becoming commercial assets. But then investigators uncovered something that intensified everything. The alleged monetization strategy. Insiders claimed Meghan's actions weren't isolated parenting decisions, but part of a broader media rollout. Documents allegedly showed proposals for a docuseries featuring the children as central narrative figures. Trademark filings attempted for their names in multiple jurisdictions. PR partnerships tied to celebrity lifestyle branding. Concepts framing Princess Diana's legacy through the children's public image. A sealed dossier reportedly delivered to the Privy Council included a financial audit verifying these connections. Whether every claim was accurate became irrelevant. Inside royal governance, perception equals threat. And once royal children appear positioned as assets rather than individuals, the response isn't emotional. It's constitutional. That evening, Princess and issued a statement. Brief, unembellished, and final. And at that moment, the Sussex situation stopped being personal. It became jurisdictional. The court decision that changed everything. On February 1st, a sealed ruling stripped Meghan Markle of remaining custodial authority over Archie and Lilibet. Not limited. Not adjusted. Removed. Meghan did not attend. Her legal team described it as a procedural withdrawal, but inside royal circles, her absence was interpreted differently. Not protest, but relinquishment. Princess and later appeared at St. James's Palace and stated plainly that the Crown would no longer recognize informal parental privileges when they conflicted with child welfare and emotional stability. And then the consequences unfolded. Financial and digital fallout. Accounts tied to private holding structures associated with Meghan were reportedly frozen under coordinated regulatory review in the UK and Canada. Media contracts tied to children-focused projects collapsed. Publishing deals disappeared. Brand partnerships dissolved. Online, the shift was immediate. Mentions of Archie and Lilibet vanished. Thumbnails were quietly replaced. Descriptions edited. Promotional branding erased. Meghan's team released a short statement citing privacy and legal proceedings. Royal insiders pointed to something stronger: an international digital identity protection order tied to child welfare protocols. The message was unmistakable. The children were no longer available for branding. And Prince Harry? He reportedly didn't see this coming. Harry's position, and the letter that ended it. Harry sought expanded visitation and joint guardianship, not full custody, but shared authority. His request was denied. Not emotionally, procedurally. Royal advisors cited unresolved residency issues, travel restrictions, and lack of institutional stability under royal frameworks. Then came the letter. Delivered by Prince Edward, long known inside the family as the executor of difficult truths, the message was short and absolute. Custody, guardianship, and protection of the Windsor children now fell entirely under Crown protocol. Any visitation required royal authorization and compliance. No argument. No negotiation. Just finality. And from that moment forward, the palace did what it always does when it intends to control the future. It secured it. The lockdown becomes absolute. An £8 million trust Meghan had reportedly created for the children's independence was frozen after palace accountants confirmed it wasn't structured through royal channels. Brand licensing tied to their names was voided. Commercial ventures terminated. Then came the sharpest measure of all. A sovereign guardianship directive, echoing powers last used during the 1936 abdication crisis, transferred both children's UK passports into royal security custody. Legally, Archie and Lilibet could not leave the United Kingdom until age 16 without Crown-approved escort. Not punishment. Protection. But while legal systems moved swiftly, something quieter was happening inside Windsor. Something human. Life inside the palace. Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly rearranged her schedule to support Lilibet through therapy sessions and daily transitions. Trusted caregivers were assigned. Structured routines introduced. George and Charlotte were encouraged to include her socially, not as obligation, but as family. One image circulated quietly among palace staff. Lilibet holding Charlotte's hand in the palace gardens, sunlight catching in her hair, her posture tentative but steady. Was this what stability looked like after disruption? For Archie, tutors introduced soft academic re-entry programs, paired with counseling designed specifically for children facing sudden environmental upheaval. Bedtime routines were rewritten. Rooms repainted. Personal belongings shipped discreetly from California. This wasn't about winning custody. It was about restoring childhood. But where did that leave Meghan? And where did that leave Harry, a father who had walked away from the monarchy, only to watch it quietly reclaim his children? Meghan's silence. And what it meant. Meghan issued no emotional statements. No televised interviews. No press tours. Just silence. Precise, controlled, and absolute. Was it grief? Anger? Strategy? Resignation? Royal analysts debated it endlessly. But inside palace walls, silence wasn't interpreted emotionally. It was interpreted procedurally. When a parent disengages from legal defense in royal guardianship cases, the institution doesn't respond with confrontation. It responds with consolidation. So the palace consolidated. Harry's quiet reckoning. Those close to Harry say the loss hit him harder than the public realized. Not because he lost custody, but because he lost jurisdiction. He had believed shared guardianship would be possible. That compromise would emerge. That his children could move fluidly between two worlds. Instead, those worlds collapsed into one. A royal aide reportedly said, for the first time since leaving the monarchy, Harry understood something. You can exit the institution, but your children cannot. Was this the price of legacy? The cost of history? Or the consequence of decisions made long before any courtroom ever convened? The larger question. So what really happened behind palace doors? Was this about protecting children from instability? About preventing commercial exploitation? About preserving royal lineage? Or about power, exercised silently, decisively, and without negotiation? Did Meghan miscalculate the institution's tolerance for disruption? Did Harry underestimate the Crown's jurisdiction over royal minors? And what happens when personal autonomy collides with institutional guardianship? Because this wasn't just a custody battle. It was a constitutional intervention. And its implications extend far beyond one family. The ending that isn't an ending. Inside Windsor, Archie and Lilibet began new routines. New classrooms. New friendships. New rhythms of life. Quieter, steadier, safer. But questions lingered. Would Meghan fight back? Would Harry adapt? Would the children ever return to California? Or had their futures been rewritten permanently inside palace walls? Royal insiders say the guardianship ruling wasn't about control. It was about time. Time for healing. Time for stability. Time for childhood. But history teaches us something else. In the monarchy, nothing ever truly ends. It simply evolves. And as palace doors closed quietly behind Archie and Lilibet, one question remained, unanswered, unresolved, and echoing far beyond Windsor's walls. Was this the moment the monarchy saved two children? Or the moment it claimed them forever? But deeper questions remained. Where was Meghan during all this? Why did Harry agree to terms so few expected? And what secret reportedly pushed him into silence? That's where the story takes its most controversial turn. Because nothing about what followed looked like a normal custody dispute. There were no public filings, no courtroom photos, no dramatic exits from courthouse steps. Instead, there was silence, coordinated, precise, and unsettling. The kind of silence that suggests not absence of action, but action too sensitive to expose. Behind palace walls, aides whispered about containment meetings. Lawyers stopped sending emails and started making phone calls. Security clearances were quietly updated. Entire corridors inside Windsor went dark after midnight as files were retrieved that hadn't been accessed in decades. And Harry stopped answering messages altogether. Those closest to him described a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. A man who carried the weight of something unspeakable. Not rage, not rebellion, but dread. The kind that settles into your bones when you realize the future you imagined for your children may no longer be in your control. What could force a father who once fled the monarchy to suddenly surrender to it? What truth could outweigh freedom? That's where the story shifts. The claim that changed the narrative. Behind the custody ruling wasn't a school schedule dispute, or financial disagreement, or even emotional instability. It was something far more volatile. According to Palace-linked sources, Prince Harry allegedly disclosed information connecting Meghan Markle to Prince Andrew, not romantically, but strategically, through intermediaries tied to influence networks, funding pipelines, and media positioning dating back years. No documents surfaced publicly. No court records named Andrew. No palace spokesperson confirmed a word of it. But insiders insist the allegation, whatever its exact nature, triggered emergency-level concern inside royal leadership. Not because of scandal. Because of precedent. Because if influence pathways existed that could intersect with the monarchy's most sensitive reputational vulnerabilities, then the issue was no longer about Meghan or Harry. It was about risk containment, institutional survival, and the children. Sources say Harry broke his silence internally, not to the press, not to memoirs, not to interviews, but during a sealed briefing with royal security advisors after being shown intelligence tying Meghan's recent actions to long-standing institutional exposure points. Not revenge. Not betrayal. Damage control. But what would push a man who once accused the monarchy of emotional abandonment to suddenly align with the same system he rejected? And what kind of intelligence convinces someone that silence is safer than truth? The midpoint question. Let's pause here. If you were in Harry's position, torn between protecting your children and confronting truths that could permanently shatter every relationship you have, what would you choose? Silence and stability? Or truth and fallout? And how much would it take for you to sign away the future you thought you were building? Because Harry did sign. And everything changed. The protocol that sealed the outcome. Behind closed doors, one document sealed the entire outcome. An Edwardian-era protocol, drafted under Queen Mary nearly a century ago, was quietly retrieved from royal archives and activated. Its purpose? to grant temporary guardianship authority to the crown during periods of familial instability involving minors tied to succession lines. This wasn't something written for celebrity custody disputes. It was written for constitutional emergencies. For situations where personal parental authority conflicted with institutional continuity. Sources say Prince William ordered its invocation. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but after weeks of psychological risk assessments, school welfare reports, diplomatic briefings, and sealed intelligence summaries that suggested escalating exposure. Not physical danger, but identity instability, reputational exploitation risk, and developmental disruption. Once activated, the protocol transferred all authority over education, residence, travel, and public exposure from personal custody structures to institutional oversight. Family rights gave way to constitutional responsibility. And Meghan's remaining leverage disappeared. No public announcement was made. No legal spectacle followed. Because in royal governance, visibility often signals vulnerability. Silence signals control. What happens when a family dispute becomes a constitutional issue? And when institutions believe children are at risk, not physically, but psychologically, socially, and symbolically, how far should they be allowed to go? What happened to Meghan afterward? Following the ruling, everything shifted, not loudly, but unmistakably. Media partnerships stalled. Children-focused initiatives froze. Brand strategies tied to motherhood narratives were suddenly postponed, pending structural review. Private holding entities reportedly faced compliance scrutiny. And invitations stopped arriving. Not dramatically, just quietly. One day, she was scheduled. The next day, meetings were delayed indefinitely. Publicly, Meghan remained silent. No statements. No lawsuits. No rebuttals. Privately, insiders say she expressed disbelief, not at the decision itself, but at its speed. How quickly authority had transferred. How final the passport seizures felt. How abruptly guardianship jurisdiction moved from private hands to institutional oversight. She reportedly asked one question repeatedly. How could they do this without a court? And the answer she received, indirectly, was devastating. This wasn't a court matter. This was constitutional. Royal leadership remained unmoved. In their framework, this wasn't punishment. It was prevention. But prevention of what? And why now? Harry's new reality. Prince Harry now occupies one of the most emotionally complex positions in modern royal history. Legally separated from parental authority. Geographically divided from his children. Institutionally aligned, by necessity, with the very system he once publicly condemned. Sources say he agreed to the custody structure in exchange for two conditions. Continued therapeutic support for the children. And written assurance that they would never be used as public symbols, political leverage, or media instruments. He reportedly received both. But the cost. Silence. Harry has not spoken publicly. He has not released a statement. He has not defended himself. And insiders believe he likely won't, not because he can't, but because he believes speaking would harm his children more than help them. One palace aide described his demeanor as quietly devastated. Another called him resigned, but not bitter. A third said something haunting. He looks like a man who's chosen grief over chaos. What does it mean when protecting your children requires disappearing from their story? When loving them means surrendering visibility? When silence becomes an act of devotion rather than defeat? Public reaction. Shock without clarity. Supporters demanded transparency. Critics accused the monarchy of authoritarian overreach. Legal scholars debated jurisdiction. Psychologists questioned the emotional impact on the children. Commentators across continents asked the same question. How could something this serious happen without a single court filing? Without a judge? Without public testimony? But without public hearings or documents, the world was left with fragments. Whispers. Leaks. Contradictions. Was this child protection? Or institutional control? Was Meghan acting independently? Or strategically? Was Harry brave? Or cornered? And perhaps most haunting of all, What truth was so dangerous it never reached the public at all? What kind of information doesn't leak? Not accidentally, not deliberately, in the age of digital surveillance and anonymous disclosures. What kind of truth dies in silence instead of scandal? Why the palace stayed silent? The House of Windsor doesn't defend decisions. It documents them. And when children are involved, it doesn't justify, it seals. Sources say King Charles personally reviewed the final guardianship structure after receiving medical, educational, and psychological risk assessments compiled by multinational specialists, not royal loyalists, but third-party consultants. His instruction, according to insiders, was simple: stability before reputation. That phrase reportedly guided every subsequent move. No interviews, no rebuttals, no counter-narratives. Because from the Crown's perspective, public debate would only destabilize the children further. And instability, not scandal, was the enemy. But when silence becomes policy, who decides which truths deserve daylight? And how much transparency does the public deserve when children's lives are reshaped behind closed doors? What this story really reveals. This wasn't just a custody dispute. It wasn't even just a royal scandal. It was a demonstration of something older and more powerful. The monarchy doesn't move emotionally. It moves constitutionally. And when it believes children are at risk, whether from instability, exploitation, exposure, or identity fracture, it doesn't negotiate. It intervenes. Quietly. Legally. Completely. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about Meghan or Harry. It was about institutional permanence and childhood preservation, as the monarchy defines it. But when institutions define what childhood should look like, whose values prevail? And when family autonomy collides with constitutional continuity, who should yield? Final question for viewers. Did Prince Harry lose his children? Or sacrifice his role to save them? Did Meghan walk away? Or was she pushed out by forces larger than any individual? And when institutions override parents in the name of stability, who truly wins? Closing reflection. No one inside Windsor is celebrating. Not Harry. Not Meghan. Not the Crown. Two children are adapting to a life reshaped by adult decisions. Some visible, others sealed forever. And the world is left with fragments. But maybe that's the real story. Not about power, not about betrayal, not about royalty, but about what happens when families fracture under pressure, and institutions step in where trust collapses. Because long after the headlines fade, it's the children who carry the consequences. The crisis that changed everything. What happens when a royal crisis stops being about headlines, and starts being about children? And when private negotiations fail, how far will the Crown go to protect what it believes is at risk? Behind palace walls, something unprecedented unfolded. Princess Catherine quietly stepped into a role no modern royal consort has held, overseeing the emotional well-being of young Leet at a private estate. The move wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't symbolic. It was functional. Sources say the child arrived withdrawn, anxious, and prone to silence. The kind that psychologists describe not as introversion, but emotional overload. But within days, something shifted. Leet reportedly began sleeping through the night, eating regularly, engaging with structured routines, and most striking of all, trusting Catherine completely. Insiders described moments where the child would reach for Catherine instinctively during moments of stress, not because of rank, but because of calm. Because in moments of chaos, trust can carry more weight than any legal document. But why did the monarchy feel compelled to act now? Why this urgency? Why this intervention? And why Catherine, known for her emotional intelligence, patience, and quiet steadiness, instead of institutional specialists alone? Across the Atlantic, Meghan's world shifts. Across the Atlantic, the mood shifted sharply. In Hollywood, Meghan's reputation reportedly cooled overnight. Not through condemnation. Not through scandal, but through silence. Negotiations stalled. Invitations disappeared. Projects moved from active development to under review. Executives reportedly began whispering one phrase: high risk. Even archived podcast metadata quietly changed, descriptions softened, branding language shifted, episode visibility was adjusted. Small moves, but deliberate ones. Signals rather than statements. And then there was Harry. Sources claimed he was no longer in California, that he was isolated in Europe, that he was struggling emotionally, that he was pleading privately for unscheduled time with his children, not publicity appearances, not photo opportunities, just ordinary hours. Breakfasts, walks, bedtime routines, moments. When relationships fracture this publicly, who truly pays the price? The adults, whose reputations absorb scrutiny, or the children, whose lives absorb instability? Inside London, alarm escalates. Back in London, urgency escalated. Princess Anne appeared before the Royal Child Welfare Committee, twice in 48 hours. Her message was clinical, not emotional, not maternal, but surgical. Concerns about emotional neglect were now documented. Reports cited school withdrawal, night terrors, delayed speech responses, long periods of silence during wellness assessments, unreturned messages from guardians, unreachable schedules. Meanwhile, photos surfaced of Meghan abroad, glamorous, composed, confident, images that, inside palace files, were interpreted not as freedom, but disengagement. Not because she traveled, not because she worked, but because absence intersected with vulnerability. And in institutional risk analysis, correlation becomes concern. But here's the deeper question. At what point does parental independence become institutional anxiety? And who decides where that line exists? The testimony that changed everything. Then came the turning point. Prince William submitted sealed testimony from a former staff member alleging Meghan once said, "Let the crown raise them. I have an empire to rebuild." Whether true or not, the words detonated emotionally inside royal leadership. Because they weren't heard as ambition. They were heard as abdication. And abdication, in institutional guardianship language, triggers escalation protocols.